Welcome back to As You Pass By. By 1918, the First World War, had ended. And also, the Russian Empire, along with the other empires of Europe, had either collapsed or were collapsing or had just ceased to be. The Russian Empire came to an end in 1917 with the arrest and then execution of the Tsar's family. But this also had a lot of implications in the United States and in New York City. There was a man named Ludwig Martins who came to New York. He was an engineer. He was born in eastern Ukraine, which at that time was part of the Russian Empire, in a town that has lately been in the news, known as Bakhmut. So he came to New York in around 1917 as an engineer, and he worked for a firm by the name of Weinberg and Posner, which was at 120 Broadway, and we're going to take you over to that building. It was a brand new building at the time, or when he worked there. And subsequently, he was the editor-in-chief of the socialist magazine known as Novy Mir, which was located on St. Mark's Place near First Avenue. And one of his fellow workers there was Leon Trotsky, one of the geniuses of the Russian Revolution, sometimes referred to as the prophet, but he worked there for a while. It wasn't very long. He lived in the Bronx and worked on 77 St. Mark's Place until he was recalled to the Soviet Union. Ludwig Martins and Leon Trotsky went back to the Soviet Union in 1919, but Ludwig Martins returned in 1919. And once he was here, he established the Russian-Soviet Government Bureau, RSGB. They had an office, quite a large one, on West 40th Street. 110 West 40th Street was also known as the World's Tower Building. And at the time, it was one of the tallest buildings in the city of New York. It was also built in the sort of neo-Gothic style, like the Woolworth Building, like a number of buildings that were built at that time. Some referred to them as Romanesque. You know, I don't know the exact label, but I call it neo-Gothic. But he established the RSGB at 110 West 40th Street. And they occupied 2 floors in the building and had a staff of 35 people. So this was not sort of something in hiding. It wasn't a safe house. It wasn't some kind of den that no one would notice. They were sort of out in the open, and they were actively recruiting or trying to curry favor with the United States government so that the new Soviet government could be recognized. The Tsarist embassy ceased to exist in 1917, and there was an embassy in Washington, but there was no ambassador after the revolution, and the post remained empty pretty much until 1933. When Ludwig Martins established the RSGB in New York City, there was another man working with him whose name was Arthur Adams. And he was a British citizen and later de facto the Soviet Union, and played a key part in the Manhattan Project, which was 20 years later. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what side you're on, the RSGB didn't survive very long. It was only there for about year and a half, and the offices were, first there was an investigation launched by the New York State Police, and they eventually raided the office, confiscated pretty much of everything that was inside, and shut the place down. Martins and Adams both returned to the Soviet Union in 1921. So I hope you enjoy. We're going to take you to 3 different locations today and see what happens as you pass by. So please remember to like and subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. It's totally free. And comment on any of the posts. And if you have a suggestion or some kind of insight, or you think I got something wrong, you can tell me that too. I will respond to everything. I'm in the middle of Zuccotti Park right now, which is down on Liberty Street and Broadway. We're looking straight ahead at not the glass building on the left, but the one that is slightly obscured, but that's 120 Broadway. And That is where Ludwig Martens worked when he first arrived in the United States. Before he worked at Novi Mir, and he worked there alone. Arthur Adams was not working with him, but he worked for an engineering firm. I haven't been able to find out the floor, but the engineering firm was Weinberg and Posner. It also was a brand new building when he worked there. It had been finished maybe 3 years earlier, and you can see in the background there's 70 Pine Street, which is another really notable New York City landmark. Let's see if I can open it up a little bit. It's a little hazy. It's, you know, the hottest day of the year here, and tons of tourists are out, as you can see. Also, just as we're down here, right over there, you can see the 55 Liberty Street building, which was the subject of last week's episode. So everything's very close down here. That's one of the earmarks in downtown. This is a slightly better view of the 120 Broadway, also known as the Equitable Building. It was fairly historic since it was the last building that was built straight up from the sidewalk. And I'll take you over here to the corner and you see why. This is the corner of Pine and Broadway, and you can see the Equitable Building, 120 Broadway, right here. Quite tall, over 30 stories. Finished in about 1913. But you can see also that it goes straight up from the curb line, as well as all of the buildings down Pine Street, with a couple of exceptions. And it was because of this, the city decided, you know, that they did not want to create these huge caverns downtown. So after the Equitable Building at 120 Broadway was finished, they required that up to a certain point that the buildings had to be stepped back and to let enough sunlight in, so that it didn't feel like you were just walking in total darkness, which of course you were. We're right across the street from 77 St. Mark's Place, which is just a few feet from First Avenue. And on the ground floor, where the La Palapa restaurant is, used to be the offices of Novi Mir magazine. This was one of the first places that Ludwig Martens established himself when he was the editor-in-chief of the Novi Mir magazine. In those days, around 1919, the East Village was pretty much of a hotbed of socialist, Marxist, communist activity, and also it was still part of the Lower East Side back then. A lot of Russian Jews had immigrated to this area. Leon Trotsky was also one of the writers who worked at Novi Mir briefly until he returned to the Soviet Union, the brand new Soviet Union, in 1921. Trotsky did not stay in New York City, but Martens did, and he went on to found the Russian Soviet Government Bureau, which was located on West 40th Street, and we're going to visit there next. Right after Martens and Trotsky worked at St. Mark's Place on the Novi Mir, they returned to Russia because the revolution had just occurred, or was in the process of occurring. But Martens returned to New York, and he established the Russian Soviet Government Bureau in this building on the third and the fourth floors. We're looking right towards that. And it wasn't like it was a very clandestine operation. I mean, this was not a safe house. This building was actually one of the tallest buildings in New York City at the time. It's 30 stories tall. It is built very similar to a couple of other buildings that we've seen. The Woolworth Building and also 55 Liberty. They were built around the same time, 1912, 1913. And a number of them claim to be the tallest buildings on a certain plot of land, and this is one of them. At the time, it was huge. So, and of course now it's dwarfed by some of his neighbors, especially this one on the corner. But They had a staff here of 35 people. So it wasn't like it was in hiding or something. It was pretty much out in the open. And the purpose was to try and gain recognition from the United States of the newly formed Soviet government. That, however, was not successful. Martins was also pretty friendly with a number of business leaders, including J.P. Morgan and Julius Hammer, the father of Armand Hammer, who was born in Russia. J.P. Morgan was not born in Russia, but they were still quite close, and he was trying to establish business relationships within Russia. So, unfortunately, the RSGB did not survive very long. The state of New York raided the office, suspected of espionage in 1920, and it was closed down in 1921, and Martins was deported. Ludwig Martins was also accompanied by Arthur Adams, who was another engineer, and he was a British citizen, but he was a Russian spy, and he helped him set up and try and establish the Russian-Soviet Government Bureau. I'm sorry about all the noise over here. After all, it is Midtown. But Adams resurfaced much later as a key player in the Manhattan Project, but we'll visit that subject later. Here's another view of 110 East 40th Street. And you can see it's pretty massive, 30 stories. It's a little tower on top of sorts. And when the government bureau was established, the RSGB was put together in 1919, this building was only 5 years old. So, and Martins did seem to end up in a couple of the more iconic real estate structures